Now, you may have missed it, but when they added the roller beetle races, the story did actually progress a little bit as well. It'd be pretty hard to miss because it comes in the form of a mail sent to you the first time you go to Lion's Arch, but I want to talk about that here. So scrap in, there's going to be obviously spoilers as of the Most Living World release because this comes immediately on the back of it, and it's some pretty interesting stuff. I think what the devs are doing here is possibly hinting at where we'll go in the next Living World release. So, what is it? Well, when you first log into LA, you get a mail from Caithe. And yes, to be clear, this is actually meant to be in the game. Over on a Reddit thread, someone proposed that maybe it had slipped in early, like this was some episode 5 stuff maybe. But one of the writers, Bobby Stein, did say, here's what the conversation went. He says, I've asked a dev in-game, and this was meant to be released with this patch. It's not been added early, and Bobby confirms correct. This was intended to go out between the 2 big releases, and it did not slip out unexpectedly. And the other person says they were confused how it wasn't in the notes. Well, a lot of these kinds of current events and small updates like this don't often make it into the notes. The devs like them to be happy surprises for us, and this certainly was for me. What I do wonder with situations like this, though, is if I come to the game a year from now and play everything in sequence, will I correctly get this mail? Will I realize that there's a release between these 2 episodes as I play everything in sequence? I hope so, but looking back at Season 3, there's a lot of cool aspects that people do miss out on. For example, the propaganda that starts getting released just around the time of the Crichton Civil War, you can accidentally gloss over while we playing it there in the moment had all this extra stuff to do to pad out between the releases. So, getting into the story, the mail's from Caithe, who had triumphantly or suddenly returned at the very end of the most recent release. She's been kind of on hiatus for a while. Path of Fire itself, the expansion, didn't really cover her very much, and we haven't seen her much this Living World either. The thing with Caithe is, though, if you rewind the clock to Season 2 and Heart of Thorns, she was a big character. That whole story with her stealing the egg and feeling some connection to Aurene is a big thing that dev haven't played with. It's kind of just accepted, oh, we're the champion now, we're the one with the psychic connection to this dragon. Well, where does that leave Caithe? There is a lot of cool stuff to explore. She's back now. The patch kind of ends on a cliffhanger with us wondering how much she'll interact with her and what their plans are, and here this release gives a little bit of it. She says, our pending discussion. Commander, I apologize for delaying our conversation, but I wanted to respect the difficult emotions surrounding your experience in the mist. Yeah, because she comes back and you try and speak to her right at the end of the release, but she kind of fobs you off. However, time is of the essence if we're to prepare Aurene and ourselves for the coming storm. Meet me at Sun's Refuge and we can discuss our next step. Now, you guys might be watching this video and listening to that and thinking that's just kind of some waffly stuff meant to sound grand, but realistically, the odds of us fighting Kraukatoric for real as a part of this Living World season in the finale seems pretty high. That idea of the coming storm, and this is the Elder Dragons of Storms, I'm really taking quite seriously. And of course, she references our experiences in the mists. We're of course talking about the abandonment of Blish there and all the sad things that were at the end of that release. Suddenly feels quite distant in my memory, but boy, what a release it really was. So she wants us to go to the Sun's Refuge. I really like this as well. What the devs are doing is making more use out of that area. There was confirmation after the patch came out that it wasn't going to be a season-wide scope thing where multiple later releases will keep keying into it in really big ways. It really is a feature just there for this part of the story, and that kind of upsets me. But it's a bit better now that we see at least this small roller beetle release has a bit more for the Sun's Refuge. So you can go, you can find Caithe, and have this little conversation with her. Commander, I'm sure you're curious why I'm here. The truth is, I've felt compelled to keep watch over Aurene for some time now. You're her champion, but I still share a deep connection with her. So straight away, the dev's going for some of those unexplored aspects of her character that I really think they kind of need to. Imagine if they just dropped this now. How weird would Heart of Thorns and Season 2, especially Season 2, where we don't know whether we can trust her anymore and she goes kind of crazy stealing the egg, talking about it being a new wild hunt and so on. How weird would that feel if they just dropped all of this? So we respond, ever the polite commander, of course, you watched over her for a long time. I'm worried about her. And that's true too. There is kind of that big chapter of the story where it was Caithe with Aurene out there in Tyria while we were gallivanting around the world on various quests back during Season 3. And Caithe gives us some information about Aurene that we didn't know, even though we're kind of in that weird parent role, dare I say. She says, when Aurene was younger, she'd sometimes go off alone if she was feeling troubled. She'll be ready when we need her. We should make sure we're also ready for her. Of course, right now in the story, Aurene has ran away, scared of the visions she was seeing of all the different fights against Kralkatorrik and losing. She had a Doctor Strange moment. There's actually been a lot of times over the recent story where Aurene's gone and we've got to go find her, and then Aurene's back, and then Aurene's gone and we've got to go find her. I hope the devs don't overdo it too much. I pretty much believe, yeah, she'll return. She'll, like, siege something from the sky in the middle of a fight, as she has so many times before. So Caithe is confident she'll come back, and actually gives a little bit more meaning to all those sudden disappearances, those moments where she wants to be alone. Puts me in mind of Last in his isolation too. So we, the commander, ask Caithe in response to this, how do you mean? And she says, Glint placed so much hope and faith in Aurene. Her legacy is what we're all counting on. But we know so little about Glint's plans. I'd like to help change that. So, yeah, Caithe has a plan. The reason for her coming back into the story is she wants to learn more about Glint and Glint's plan, which is great. It's weird to get a key character motivation between two releases, but it makes sense. And I especially remember when we were rolling into Heart of Thorns and the idea of Glint's legacy was first being established, outside the game interviews with devs and writers saying, oh yeah, Glint's plans, Glint's legacy is this really big thing. You're going to learn a lot about it. So far, that hasn't amounted to too much. It's amounted to the project we've seen at Kesho. It's amounted to the project we saw at Tyria, the creation of the Exalted. But what other facets were there? Well, Caithe wants to know, and so do I. The commander says, the more we know, the better. Where do you plan to start? And here's the bomb, if you can call it that. Caithe says, I believe a certain Brotherhood knew more about Glint's legacy than they let on. I intend to find out just how much. And we say, just sounds just like the place. I'll be in touch. You can also you press F on her again. And she says, forgive me, Commander. I have preparations to make before I head north. We'll speak again soon. Good luck. So I immediately, having read this, know what this is talking about. I wonder what the ratio of regular Guild Wars 2 players is. I have that, but as a big fan of the lore in the first game, I'm immediately put in mind of what Caithe's talking about. She's talking about the dwarves, guys. She's talking about the Brotherhood of the Dragon. So in this video, I want to get you all up in touch as to why this is exciting and what this could mean maybe about the next release. That is it, by the way. That's everything they've given, just that bit of dialogue. So let's go into a short bit of backstory, right? The Brotherhood, what are they? Well, in the original Guild Wars, you go to the desert to ascend. You meet Glint there, and shortly afterwards, you're dumped in the southern Shiver Peaks. When you're there, you're at a large town outpost called Droknar's Forge, and at Droknar's you meet a sect of dwarves. Now, there have already been a lot of dwarves that you've met in the story at this point, because you've been in the Shiver Peaks already at this point. You know about the regular dwarves following King Jarlath. You know that they're religious and they follow the Great Dwarf as they believe in. You know that there's another faction of them, Xenophobes, the Stone Summit, who are enslavers. You know that there's a civil war. Then when you get there after the desert, you learn about this other thing too. The Brotherhood of the Dragon. They're dwarves that give themselves the rank of consular, who kind of follow, worship, and collaborate with Glint. Now, it's really important to note in this video, you never actually firsthand really have a scene where Glint is talking to dwarves and, you know, doing plans and things with them, but you hear from the Brotherhood that that is a thing that goes on, right? So you can speak to a couple of them in Droknar's, and this is really the only place you get to interact with them much. One of them says, do you seek wisdom from the Great Dragon? And at this point, they mean Glint. The Elder Dragons haven't manifested, of course. Do you seek wisdom from the Great Dragon? Well, you can kneel here before her altar, and perhaps you will be rewarded with a vision of Glint herself. So the Brotherhood of the Dragon are maintaining this curious magical device that when you activate it via kneeling, it creates this apparition of Glint that can communicate with you. And she uses that in Prophecy's Endgame to give you a selection of really difficult quests where you're killing the last of the Titans and cleaning things up. She also gives you a bit of dialogue hinting at the Canthan story too, which is really bizarre. And I guess the devs kind of dropped in the end. I think that this altar and this vision of Glint was possibly an early idea for the devs as kind of an endgame quest giver and hub for players, because it also existed in the first town where you could get max level armor and whatnot, but they swiftly moved on from that and she wasn't used very much. But yeah, this is how you interacted with Glint, not physically in person, but you could talk to her She could communicate telepathically, and she'd give you some really cool end game objectives. The shrine, tended by these dwarves. There is another very key Brotherhood of the Dragon member at Dropnar's Forge who gives you a good block of text talking a bit more about them. Here it is. He says, "Do not be afraid. I'm sure you've heard the rumors about the Brotherhood of the Dragon, many of which are not so flattering. There are those in the dwarven community who see our connection to the dragon Glint as blaspheme against the Great Dwarf. But I assure you, our Brotherhood is not grounded in the spiritual realm. We are more interested in the, well, practical applications, if you will, of prophecy and the art of prognostication. Please, stay a while. Perhaps you'll learn a thing or two." So, of course, Glint could see the future. She was prophetic. And, yeah, you'd want to tap into that. So it's not so much that they are betraying the Great Dwarf and whatnot, but certainly in the eyes of their peers, most other regular dwarves, they seem to be, you know, actually not very much flattered, right? So, yeah, that's the Brotherhood of the Dragon. Fairly minor thing. So what does that mean for Guild Wars 2 if you're Caithe? Well, in the second game, you can go back to Dropnar's Forge, this place I'm talking about, but the shrine wouldn't likely work if you could activate it, since Glint died. Also, there's the fact that Dropnar's Forge is now sunken underwater. It's one of those places that had a really radical difference between the two games. That often happened in mountain environs, actually. And now it's just like, it's called Sunken Dropnar, and I think there's some Quaggan nearby. That's it. And in terms of actual physical assets, you don't really see much in the way of ruins there, certainly not the shrine. So that's kind of a no-go as far as I'm concerned. Maybe the devs will change Mount Maelstrom, which is where this is located, to have the shrine and stuff, and have us get some content where we go with Caithe there or something, but I don't know. You can make an argument, even though Glint died, she is still active in the mists, and with all the realms collapsing and her telepathy and all of that other stuff, maybe suddenly it could work. In fact, this revelation as of the most recent patch, that Glint is still active and doing things, that really shakes the foundations of a lot of lore, and this is one of them. What if the Brotherhood of the Dragon heard that Glint was still cognate and around, just in the mists? Would they try to seek her out? Before we go on too much about that, let's return to Guild Wars 1, because there was one other place where the Brotherhood of the Dragon existed. After Prophecies, at the very end of Eye of the North, basically one of the latest points in the timeline before the gap before Guild Wars 2, you meet the Brotherhood of the Dragon again. The dwarves have a very big role to play in Eye of the North, because this is the moment that they turn themselves to stone and their eternal battle against the minions of Primordus is established. At the very end, when the dwarves undergo this rite, you end up meeting up with a lot of them, and several of them are members of the Brotherhood of the Dragon, a sect that we hadn't seen for years now, not since the original Prophecy story. Some of them actually need your help. There's a challenge mission right at the end of Eye of the North where they say this: "The Brotherhood of the Dragon is in dire need of help, my friend. Glint calls to us, for the destroyers have risen to threaten even her. Her offspring are in danger. Will you help?" And you can ask, what challenge am I facing exactly? And they say, "Destroyers pour forth from soil like cicadas waking from a deep slumber. The dragon child is safe inside a fortress, a tiny shard of sand within the massive crystal desert. Some of our Brotherhood have taken to the walls to defend it. They await your arrival. Hold out until all the destroyers are defeated." You can ask for advice, and he says the destroyers adapt quickly. Should they discover one of their kind is not strong enough to overcome our defenses, I fear they will counteract. Be prepared for anything. If you do well in this challenge mission, you get a little bit more lore about the Brotherhood of the Dragon as well, where they say the Brotherhood of the Dragon is a sacred dwarven order that serves Glint. I am its master armorer. Bring me cloths of the Brotherhood, and I'll upgrade the armor of one of your heroes. Whose armor do you want to change? So, it's kind of cool to realize, actually, doing this video with you all, that, yeah, many of our heroes in the original game, you could kit out to wear Brotherhood of the Dragon stuff, even if they were a fairly minor part of the game. But basically, yes, at the end of Eye of the North, the mission where you're defending the baby dragon, this is Vlast, okay? When you're defending Vlast, as he's been born from destroyers, you're doing that with the Brotherhood of the Dragon. You accomplish that. Glint, I guess, is helpful. You'll notice again that even though there's a suggestion Glint has been talking with the Brotherhood, we don't actually see them. We just see that they're defending her. And with that, the game kind of closes down. And time moves forwards. 250 years, and that's time for a lot of things. The dwarves, and here's the biggest one, invoke the right of the great dwarf. They actually did it slightly before the baby defense. And over the next 250 years, eventually end up following their king into the depths of Tyria, deep underground. And after that, we don't really hear much of what happened with them. And specifically, the Brotherhood of the Dragon, we don't hear that either. We don't get to know how they really felt. Were they happy to abandon Glint? Did they talk to Glint about it and confirm they were all going? Do some of them still exist on the surface? These are all questions we can ask ourselves, and Caithe would be asking herself right now. I think it's likely that Glint would consent to the dwarves and the Brotherhood of the Dragon going underground, because Glint was all about fighting and preparing against the Elder Dragons, and immediately coming out the back of Eye of the North, what does Glint have? A nice strong faction of free peoples on Tyria who are sworn to fight against them. So I think that the dwarves go underground, and Glint probably says to the Brotherhood, yeah, go for it, I'll be fine. So she's left alone mostly, and over time she finds herself replacements for the Brotherhood of the Dragon. She also, for what it's worth, at this time loses a lot of the Forgotten, it seems, who are at her side. Where the Forgotten went or what happened with them and their collaborations with Glint, I guess is going to have to be a mystery for another video. But Glint takes this opportunity to build up some new people, right? She gets the Zephyrhites. She creates the Exalted from chosen special humans who undergo those trials. And she starts looking at Kesho and Tyria and stuff. In fact, if you go to Tyria, if you remember, there's that beautiful achievement where you can learn about the Zephyrhites' past, and there is that moment where one of the panels says, your friends and families have a no less important charge. The Brotherhood of the Dragon passed its mantle onto them. They are the first guardians of the egg, and only once it nears its time will they deliver it to you. So basically, yeah, the Brotherhood of the Dragon kind of passed their torch on to the Zephyrhites, who protect the egg in their skies until it starts to shake, and then they got to bring it to Tyria. So, and I believe the very first patch where we met the Zephyrhites, where they had that song talking about Glint and stuff, there are immediately hints that the Zephyrhites are the Brotherhood of the Dragon of the future, really. So, again, what does that mean for Caithe? Are we about to get a lot more Zephyrite story? Is she going to seek them out? I suppose that would be at least somewhere to start. But what about the original Brotherhood? You might think, well, they're all gone, but not necessarily. You can have the original Brotherhood who have now become stone immortal dwarves. They could still be alive, just underground and kind of isolated from Glint. They might know things that Glint never imparted upon the modern day Zephyrhites. They could still be there, and I think if I was Caithe, I'd be looking at those as well. You might not have too much luck with that, granted, since most of the time we hear about the stone dwarves now, it's like they're really on the back foot and they've been destroyed and there's not many. I definitely think that there is still a big chance that there's a ton of them underground. The lore has never definitively said the dwarves have all been destroyed. We hear that that they're extinct, and we hear that, you know, they're struggling, but that's always within the context of surface dwarves. Like Ogden is the last dwarf on the surface kind of thing. Roban that we met in season 3, he'd had his head chopped off and he said that he was with some other dwarves and they obviously weren't going through a good time. But I still get the very much impression that there could be a lot underground. In fact, you know what would have been awesome in season 3? If we'd met a contingent of deep underground dwarves in Flashpoint after we went in the volcano. That would have been so brilliant. Right, so if you're Caithe, I think that there's one place that's really obvious you'd go straight away, and that's the main dwarf we know that's still on the surface who might be able to talk about these things. That's Ogden. Ogden wasn't necessarily a member of the Brotherhood, though I think he talked about them a bit in Season 2 when we were doing the fake Ascension rituals, maybe? I would go to Ogden. He's with the Priory. He's always been open about these things. Ogden's always had information we should get. Maybe he can talk more about Glint's legacy. And we might find that we get a little bit of content there, or Caithe will talk about what she did there. After that, I'm guessing Ogden will point her, if this is going to manifest into a real story, to one of two places. One, to a new snowy map. And we've been speculating we could have a snowy map for a long time, even since the Forsaken Thicket releases and the Art of Mountains a lot of time, and the White Mantle suggestion about that, and the suggestion of a Bloodstone fragment that could have been out there, and, you know, the Elder Dragons will be looking for those. We've had a lot of different reasons to maybe look at icy places. I think we could have one again. Path of Fire already has gotten a little bit of Frozen Mountain content. We were even led there very recently with the Legendary Ring collection from most recent raid stuff. Why that location there in mountains? I like the thought that we'll get a northern map, Caithe even mentioned she's going north, right? Though that could have just been north to the Priory. I like the idea we'll get a northern map that gives us some mountainy stuff. Maybe even could deal a bit with the Ebonhawk Gate if it ends up going that far east. But if not just an icy map, that's perhaps in the ancient dwarf lands, we could just be going straight up underground. And I know the community is not going to be that excited about that. People don't like maps like Tangled Depths. They don't like lots of verticality in maps. But eventually, I do want to see the depths of Tyria. And I think that would be a cool thing to do. Maybe the devs can do it all. Maybe it can be a map that starts in the mountains and also has some really, really deep, deep places, just like we saw with Flashpoint, and falling down that massive tunnel. So really nice. That's basically what the Roller Beetle patch did. I think this is a cool way that for the devs to have galvanized a bit of upcoming patch speculation from the community, because it's impossible to speak to Caithe here and then not wonder where the game is going next. And that's been very, very, very exciting. So there you go, guys. You're all up. You're caught up. And we will see where the next release takes us pretty soon. Of course, Caithe could just go off on her own adventure. It has nothing to do with what we do next patch. That would be equally funny and a reason for us to stay in Path of Fire locations, or, you know, really strictly alone in ones. Thanks, guys. Let me know what you think. See you tomorrow.